The frozen hell of Holtzwihr offered no mercy. Company B's positions stretched along the tree line like a broken necklace. 40 men, where there should have been nearly 200. They weren't soldiers anymore. They were ghosts, in olive drab, hollow-eyed and shaking, their hands so numb they could barely work the bolts of their rifles. 3 days without sleep, 5 days of constant combat. Frostbite had claimed toes, fingers, entire feet. Half the men couldn't feel their extremities anymore. The other half wished they couldn't. K-rations frozen solid. Machine guns that jammed every third burst because the oil had turned to paste in the sub-zero cold. The ground was iron. They'd spent the night trying to dig foxholes with frozen entrenching tools, managing shallow scrapes that wouldn't stop shrapnel, let alone bullets. Now, as grey dawn bled into grey afternoon, those scrapes were all that stood between them and the mile of open snowfield, stretching toward Holtzwihr. Murphy stood in the drainage ditch that served as his command post, field telephone in one hand, binoculars in the other. His leg throbbed where shrapnel had opened it 2 days ago. A secret he kept from everyone, because losing their last officer would destroy what little morale remained. Then the horizon changed. "Contact!" The shout came from Private Ackman, his voice cracking with exhaustion and terror. "Armor! Multiple contacts!" 6 dark shapes materialized through the snow haze, German tanks and tank destroyers spreading into attack formation. Behind them, the snowfield seemed to ripple and shift as 250 white-clad infantry emerged like specters. The 2nd Gebirgs Division. Elite mountain troops who'd spent years in Norway, learning to kill in conditions exactly like this. Murphy's artillery request went out immediately, his voice steady on the field phone despite what he was seeing. But even as friendly shells began falling among the German formations, he knew artillery alone wouldn't stop this. Not with the enemy this dispersed, not with them moving this fast. At 600 yards, both M10 tank destroyers opened fire. The shots went wide, cold-numbed crews, frozen hydraulics, exhaustion making steady hands shake. The German response was surgical. An 80mm round struck the rear M10 dead center. The explosion was white-hot against the gray snow, ammunition cooking off in a chain reaction that sent the crew scrambling for their lives, uniforms smoking as they ran for the trees. The forward M10 tried to maneuver, tracks churning for purchase on the frozen ground. It slid sideways into a drainage ditch like a drunken whale, tilted at an angle that made the gun useless. Its crew bailed out, sprinting for cover as German machine gun fire chased them through the snow. 200 yards and closing. Murphy could see individual German faces now through his binoculars. Young men, old men, professionals who moved with the confidence of veterans who knew they had the Americans trapped. 6 tanks, 250 rifles. Against 40 frozen, starving Americans with no anti-tank weapons and nowhere to run. "Lieutenant," Sergeant Paulson was at his elbow, voice urgent. "We need to pull back, now." Murphy looked at the burning M10. Flames and black smoke pouring skyward. Ammunition still cooking off inside, with sharp, metallic cracks. The 50 caliber machine gun mounted on top, untouched by the fire, pointing uselessly at empty sky. He made his decision. "Get everyone back to the woods," Murphy said, his voice carrying the weight of an order that would save lives. Everyone's but his own. "Establish a defensive line in the trees. Move. Now." Paulson stared at him. "What about you?" Before we continue, click that subscribe button, like this video, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It brings me great joy knowing that these war stories and lessons get to people all over the world. Your support helps us bring more thrilling war stories, and trust me, You won't want to miss them. Now, let's get back to the story. Murphy was already moving toward the burning tank destroyer, field telephone cord trailing behind him like an umbilical. "I'll be right behind you," Murphy lied. Then he climbed onto the burning coffin and reached for the machine gun. The man climbing onto that burning tank destroyer wasn't born a soldier. He was forged by necessity in the cotton fields of Hunt County, Texas, where survival was arithmetic and every mistake had consequences. Audie Leon Murphy entered the world on June 20th, 1925, the sixth of 12 children born to sharecroppers who had nothing but mouths to feed. Poverty wasn't just their circumstance. It was their inheritance, passed down like a family heirloom no one wanted. When his father abandoned them, 12-year-old Audie became a man overnight. When his mother died 5 years later, 16-year-old Audie became a father to siblings who depended on him to keep them alive. The borrowed .22 rifle became his lifeline. One bullet, one rabbit. Miss, and the family went hungry. There was no room for error, no second chances, no excuses. Each shot had to count because each bullet cost money they didn't have. "If I don't hit what I shoot at, my family doesn't eat tonight," he'd told his neighbor, explaining why he never missed. Under that pressure, something crystallized in young Murphy. A cold, mechanical precision that treated shooting not as sport, but as survival. Drop a running rabbit at 50 yards, calculate wind, distance, lead time in the fraction of a second before the trigger pull. Make the impossible shot, because anything less meant empty bellies and crying siblings. That skill would later make German soldiers whisper his name like a curse. When Pearl Harbor burned, Murphy saw his escape. The military meant steady pay, 3 meals a day, money to send home. But even desperation couldn't overcome biology. 5'5", 110 pounds, baby-faced and slight. The Marines rejected him. Too small. The Navy turned him away. Too light. The paratroopers wouldn't even consider him. Finally, the regular Army infantry accepted him on June 30th, 1942, only after his sister Corinne lied about his age on a sworn affidavit. Private Murphy arrived at Camp Walters looking like someone's kid brother who'd stolen a uniform. The drill sergeants called him Baby. Fellow recruits thought he was a mascot. Then he picked up a rifle. Those baby blue eyes went cold as winter, Private McClure remembered. He never missed. Not once. Sicily changed everything. Company B landed at Licata in July 1943. And Murphy discovered the terrible truth about himself. The same cold precision that had fed his family now killed with mechanical efficiency. Near Palermo, pinned down by German machine guns, he flanked the position alone, eliminated the crew with grenades, and turned their weapon on retreating soldiers. No hesitation, no emotion, just deadly arithmetic. See a German, eliminate the German, move to the next German, Sergeant Paulson later explained. Murph didn't fight angry. He fought like he was balancing a ledger. That's what was terrifying. The campaigns blurred together. Salerno's chaos, Anzio's meat grinder, Rome's rubble. Murphy collected wounds and medals with equal indifference. At the Volturno River, he held off an entire counterattack alone, killing 5 Germans at 300 yards with borrowed sniper rifle. Distinguished Service Cross. At Anzio, he destroyed a tank at point-blank range with a bazooka. Silver Star. By southern France, his reputation preceded him. Germans knew his face from intelligence reports. Americans knew his name from citation after citation. When his lieutenant died in an ambush near Montélimar, Sergeant Murphy took command without being asked. 18 men against a German company of over 100. He held a crossroads for 2 hours through arithmetic and will, 15 enemy dead by his personal count. The battlefield commission came October 14, 1944. Second Lieutenant Audie Murphy, 19 years old. Over 100 confirmed kills. Most of his original company dead or evacuated. The boy from Texas who'd learned to shoot because missing meant starvation had become something the Army didn't have a manual for. A killer so efficient, so cold, so utterly without fear, that even his own men weren't sure if he was still human. But on January 26, 1945, they would learn the truth. Murphy wasn't fearless. He just refused to let fear matter. The metal deck was hot enough to melt boot soles. Murphy hauled himself onto the burning M10, flames roaring from the engine compartment behind him, ammunition cooking off below with sharp metallic cracks that shook the hull. Smoke poured skyward, thick and black, marking his position like a beacon for every German gun on the battlefield. He didn't care. The .50 caliber machine gun was still intact, swiveling smoothly on its mount. Murphy yanked back the charging handle, felt the bolt slam home, and swung the barrel toward the advancing white-clad figures, now less than 200 yards away. Then he opened fire. The gun roared, a sound like continuous thunder, each round the size of a man's finger, punching through winter air at 2,900 feet per second. The first burst cut down 3 Germans in a neat line. The second dropped 2 more, trying to take cover in the snow. Murphy's hands moved with mechanical precision. Short bursts, traverse, acquire, fire. The same cold arithmetic that had dropped rabbits in Texas now erased men from existence. No emotion, no hesitation. Just the equation. See target, eliminate target, move to next target. The Germans couldn't comprehend what they were seeing. Their doctrine said this was impossible. Suppressive fire from a single position could be flanked, overwhelmed, bypassed. But this wasn't suppression. This was surgical. Every burst found flesh. Every traverse brought death. "Fire mission," Murphy shouted into the field telephone, wedged between his shoulder and ear, never taking his eyes off the advancing infantry. "Coordinates." He rattled off numbers that placed friendly artillery directly on his own position. A circle of steel that would turn the snowfield into an abattoir. The first shells screamed in 30 seconds later, exploding among the German formations with white-hot fury. But still, they came. Professional soldiers who'd been trained that attacks succeed through mass and momentum. Murphy kept firing. The .50 caliber bucked against his grip, its cadence steady as a heartbeat. Germans fell in 1s and 2s, then 3s and 4s. Officers shouting orders disappeared in red mist. Machine gun teams trying to set up their weapons crumpled before they could fire a shot. Then the world exploded. An 80 mm shell detonated 20 feet away, showering Murphy with frozen earth and white-hot shrapnel. He felt something punch into his leg, different from the old wound, sharper, hotter. Warm blood soaked his trousers, freezing almost instantly in the sub-zero air. He kept firing, 50 yards now. German voices screaming in his ears, orders and curses and prayers all mixing together. He could see their faces, young men, terrified men, desperate men who'd walked into a nightmare wearing human skin. The ammunition belt began to run thin. Murphy's hands moved faster, making every round count. 30 yards, 20. Individual features visible now. Stubbled chins, wide eyes, frozen breath misting in the air. 10 yards, close enough to see the exact moment when their will broke. It started with one soldier, a veteran by the look of him, who simply stopped advancing and stared at the burning tank destroyer, at the lone figure standing atop it, wreathed in smoke and flame, and made a decision that survival mattered more than orders. He turned and ran, then another, then 10, then 50. The retreat became a rout. Elite mountain troops, men trained to assault Norwegian fortifications, to fight in conditions that killed lesser soldiers, broke and fled across the frozen field like children running from a monster. Behind them, the tanks reversed, commanders screaming into radios, turrets swinging uselessly because their infantry support had evaporated. Murphy kept firing until the last German disappeared over the ridge. Then he kept firing into empty snow, just to be sure. When the final round clicked on an empty chamber, he released the gun and looked out across the battlefield. Bodies, dozens of them, scattered across the white field in grotesque poses, blood already freezing black on the snow. Abandoned equipment, dropped rifles, discarded helmets marking the path of their panicked retreat. One soldier had stopped an army. Murphy climbed down from the burning coffin, his legs screaming, his hands burned, his ears ringing from an hour of continuous fire. In the tree line, 40 Americans stared at him like he'd just descended from Olympus. He'd held for 1 hour, alone, against mathematics that said he should be dead. But mathematics had never met Audie Murphy. The strangest thing about Audie Murphy's stand at Holzwihr isn't what was recorded. It's what wasn't. American after-action reports are detailed, clinical, almost obsessive in their documentation. Company B's records describe the assault, the casualties, Murphy's actions in meticulous detail. Witness statements from 40 surviving soldiers corroborate every moment. The Medal of Honor citation, filed weeks later, reads like a fever dream, but every word is verified, cross-referenced, confirmed. The German records say almost nothing. The 2nd Gebirgsdivision's war diary for January 26, 1945, contains a single line. Attack on enemy positions near Holzwihr repulsed. Moderate casualties. That's it. No details. No analysis. No mention of how an entire reinforced company, 250 elite mountain troops supported by 6 armored vehicles, was stopped cold by a single American defender on a burning tank destroyer. No mention of the bodies left behind in the snow. No explanation for why professional soldiers, trained in Norwegian winter warfare, retreated in chaos from a position they should have overrun in minutes. Just attack repulsed. Moderate casualties. In the decades since, military historians have searched for German perspective on the battle. Personal diaries from 2nd Gebirgsdivision survivors. Memoirs from officers who planned the assault. Letters home from soldiers who were there. Post-war interviews with veterans. Nothing. Not one first-hand German account of what happened in those frozen fields has ever surfaced. Not one diary entry describing the lone American who wouldn't die. Not one letter mentioning the impossible defense that shattered their attack. The silence is so complete, so total, that it becomes its own kind of testimony. Because this is what humiliation sounds like. Imagine being an elite soldier, a veteran of Norway's brutal winter campaigns, trained in mountain warfare, hardened by years of combat. You've crushed resistance across France. You've survived the Eastern Front. You know your craft. Then you watch 250 of your comrades, supported by armor and artillery, fail to dislodge one American boy standing on a burning vehicle. You watch him kill your friends with mechanical precision. You watch shells explode around him, and he doesn't flinch. You advance within 10 yards, close enough to see his face, young and blood-streaked and utterly without fear, and you realize he's going to kill you too, unless you run. So you run. And later, when the war is over and you're home, and someone asks what happened in France, what do you say? How do you explain that your unit, elite troops, the pride of the Wehrmacht, broke and fled from a teenager who weighed barely 50 kilograms? You don't. You say nothing. You write nothing. You take the memory and bury it so deep that no historian will ever find it. The German silence around Holzwihr isn't absence of evidence. It's evidence of shame so profound that an entire division chose collective amnesia over acknowledgement. They couldn't kill one American soldier, so they killed the story instead. But the mathematics remain, carved into official records that can't be erased. 40 Americans held their position. Company B suffered minimal casualties. The German assault collapsed. And somewhere in Germany, old men who once wore mountain troop insignia still won't talk about the day they met a ghost in the snow who refused to die. The silence tells the story they won't. Audie Murphy came home to ticker tape parades and magazine covers, the most decorated soldier in American history. 28 medals, the Medal of Honor, the Distinguished Service Cross, Silver Stars, Bronze Stars, Purple Hearts. The photographers loved him, baby-faced and humble, the all-American hero who'd single-handedly stopped a German army. Life magazine put him on the cover. Hollywood came calling. He shook hands with generals and senators, smiled for cameras, gave speeches about duty and courage. But at night, he was back on that burning tank destroyer. The nightmares started before he even left Europe. He'd wake up screaming, convinced Germans were breaching his position, reaching for weapons that weren't there, calling for artillery on enemies that existed only in his fractured mind. The other soldiers learned to wake him from a distance. Getting too close meant getting hurt by a man whose combat reflexes didn't distinguish between dream and reality. It never stopped. Back in Texas, in the house he bought with his military pay and Hollywood earnings, Murphy slept with a loaded .45 pistol under his pillow. Every night, for the rest of his life. His wife, Pamela, would wake to find him gone, patrolling the house at 3 a.m., checking windows and doors, securing a perimeter against threats that weren't there. He couldn't help it. His mind was still on the battlefield, still calculating fields of fire, still waiting for the attack he knew was coming. He never slept more than 2 or 3 hours at a time, Pamela later recalled. He'd wake up drenched in sweat, sometimes crying, sometimes angry. He'd check on the children obsessively, convinced something terrible was about to happen. Hypervigilance, the doctors would eventually call it. PTSD. Combat fatigue, shell shock. Different names for the same invisible wound. The price paid by men who'd seen and done things that fundamentally rewired their ability to feel safe. Murphy couldn't sit with his back to a door, couldn't tolerate crowds. Loud noises sent him diving for cover years after the guns had fallen silent. Simple activities, grocery shopping, attending parties, watching fireworks, became minefields of triggers that transported him back to Sicily, Anzio, Holzwihr. The hero everyone celebrated was dying inside, one sleepless night at a time. But Murphy did something most veterans of his era couldn't. He talked about it. In an age when admitting psychological wounds was seen as weakness, when real men were supposed to simply move on, Murphy went public with his struggles. He testified before Congress about the mental health crisis facing combat veterans. He spoke openly about his nightmares, his insomnia, his inability to readjust to civilian life. The worst wounds are the ones you can't see, he told a Senate committee in 1969. We spend billions training men to kill, teaching them to suppress every human instinct, rewiring them for war. Then we send them home and expect them to just flip a switch and be normal again. He became one of the first major public advocates for recognizing and treating combat trauma, using his fame to force America to confront an uncomfortable truth, that the men who'd won the war were still fighting battles no one else could see. Murphy lobbied for better psychiatric care for veterans. He funded research into PTSD before the term existed. He spoke at VA hospitals, sharing his story with broken men who thought they were alone in their suffering. "If Audie Murphy can admit he's struggling," one veteran wrote, "then maybe it's okay that I am too." The man who'd faced 250 Germans without flinching showed more courage in his vulnerability than he ever did in combat. But the nightmares never stopped. The hypervigilance never faded. The pistol remained under his pillow until the day he died. Some wounds don't heal. They just teach you how to live with the scars. The fields outside Holzwihr are quiet now. Farmland stretches where 250 German soldiers once advanced through snow, where a burning tank destroyer became the pivot point of history. Wheat grows in soil that once ran red. Children play where men died. The frozen hell of January 26, 1945, has given way to peaceful seasons: spring planting, summer harvest, winter's gentle blanket. But memory remains. A stone memorial stands at the edge of the Bois de Riedweir forest, marking the spot where 2nd Lieutenant Audie Murphy made his stand. The inscription is simple, the facts almost too stark to believe. 1 soldier, 1 hour. One impossible act of defiance that changed the mathematics of war. Every January 26th, they gather: French civilians, American veterans, military delegations from both nations. Fewer veterans each year, as time claims what German bullets couldn't. But the ceremony endures. Old men in uniform stand where young men once bled, laying wreaths and saluting a memory that refuses to fade. The French haven't forgotten. How could they? An American boy who weighed barely 50 kilograms saved their village, held the line when everything said it should break, proved that will can trump numbers when the stakes are absolute. At West Point, Fort Benning, and military academies across the world, Murphy's stand is taught as a case study. Not just in tactics, though the tactical lessons are profound, but in leadership, in courage, in the willpower that transforms ordinary men into legends. The lesson isn't about the 50 caliber machine gun, or the artillery support, or the burning tank destroyer. It's about the decision. The moment when Murphy sent his men to safety and climbed onto that flaming coffin alone. When he chose certain death over the possibility of watching his soldiers die. When he decided that if mathematics said they were doomed, he'd rewrite the equation with his own blood. Murphy didn't stand his ground because he was fearless, one instructor tells each new class of officers. He stood because his men needed him to. Leadership isn't about being unafraid. It's about acting despite fear, choosing sacrifice over survival when that's what the mission demands. The most decorated soldier in American history, 33 awards including the Medal of Honor, every valor decoration the U.S. could bestow, plus honors from France and Belgium, never claimed to be special. "I was just doing my job," he'd say when asked about Holzwihr. "They were killing my men." That answer, repeated throughout his life with the same humble simplicity, reveals the heart of his heroism. Not superhuman courage, not fearlessness, not even hatred of the enemy. Just loyalty, just duty, just the fundamental refusal to let others die while he lived. Murphy died in a plane crash on May 28, 1971, at age 45. He was buried at Arlington National Cemetery with full military honors. His gravesite remains the second most visited in the cemetery, surpassed only by President John F. Kennedy's. A simple white headstone that draws millions who come to pay respects to a sharecropper's son who became a giant. The story of Holzwihr endures because it speaks to something deeper than tactics or medals or military history. It speaks to the capacity within ordinary people to achieve extraordinary things when circumstances demand it. Murphy wasn't superhuman. He was 5'5", 110 pounds, 19 years old, wounded, exhausted, and terrified. But he climbed onto that burning tank destroyer anyway. That's the legacy. Not that heroes are fearless, but that they act despite their fear. Not that courage means absence of terror, but that it means standing when every instinct screams to run. The fields outside Holtzwihr grow wheat now, peaceful and quiet beneath French skies. But the ground remembers the day one ordinary man proved that the human spirit, when pressed to its limits, can break any equation written by mere mathematics. And in that memory lives a truth that will never fade. Heroism isn't being unafraid. It's refusing to let fear decide.